Well, hello everyone. Happy Math Crush Monday. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late tonight. We are having some technical difficulties, but we're here. So welcome to the Facebook group for Math Crush Monday. So glad that you're here. If you're watching live, let us know in the chat. Just say, hey, it's me, where you're watching from, what state, what school district, maybe what grade you teach. And then if you're watching the replay, just comment replay. Let us know that you're watching that way as well. My name is Shannon Keebler. For those of you who do not know me, welcome to the group. We have lots of new members in the group, and I'm the moderator of the group. I planned or taught every lesson in Math Expressions, and now I help teach and train teachers like you nationwide. I do not work for the publisher. I work independently and am the author of the Math Genius Squad. So I know we have several members in the group. Say, hey, if you're a member in the chat, I'd love to see and hear from you. But tonight we're talking about the workbook. And the workbook causes us a lot of grief and drama and trauma, and you name it, it's an issue. So we're going to talk tonight about the do's and the don'ts. What is the purpose of the Math Expressions workbook, which there's lots of different names for it. So I want to clear that up first. One is that it's always referred to in the teacher's edition as the student activity book. So it's nicknamed SAB. That's the name of it in the teacher's guide. When they're referencing something, they'll say, oh, look at SAB page. That's what they mean, the student activity book. But there is also just an activity workbook, and that is separate. So generally 2018 users don't really have access to this. It was something that was early on. I'm not sure if they're still selling it or not, but the activity workbook would be where you don't have every page that the teacher's guide alludes that is in the workbook, right? So it'll show a picture of the workbook, and then your kids have that in the workbook. The activity workbook is different. It is only the pages that teachers felt like they really needed to have a copy of. So you're not going to find pages that have just like vocabulary and whatnot on it. But if it was, kids need to graph something and that particular workbook page had the coordinate grid on it, then that would be a page that would be in the workbook because it's considered a needed page. So it's a cheaper version of the student book because it doesn't include everything. Again, check with your rep. I'm not sure if they're still even offering that, but some of you have that. It's almost like a companion. So a lot of people that bought the hardbound books would get that activity workbook with the hardbound book. So they still technically had a student book with all the pages, but only the consumables that really were high demand were put in that consumable workbook. So check to see if that's even an option for you all, but that's what we mean tonight when we're talking about the workbook versus the activity workbook. Okay, either one, we're going to treat the same. So let me get this going over here. I'm going to share my screen for you. Again, say hi in the chat or let me know how you're using the workbook and any questions that you might have as well. So when we look at the do's and the don'ts of the workbook, I actually stole a couple of slides here from our Math Expressions User Summit that we had at the beginning of August. If you came, wave your hand at me. I know we have more than 600 people at that summit. And if you were a VIP pass holder, then you also got the VIP course, which was the Math Workbook Overhaul. Okay, so the Math Workbook Overhaul was a mini course that I did. And so I included just a couple of those slides, of course, not giving it all away, but gave you a couple of them here because it really is relevant to this conversation. The first one is just the purpose of the workbook. Okay, so the purpose of the workbook is, of course, it provides visuals of concepts, right? That was a big driving force for Dr. Fuson, the author of Expressions. She wanted to make sure that students had access to the visuals because Math Expressions is really visual, instead of like if they didn't have a projection device, if they didn't have an overhead, a document, a projector, whatever. Okay, if they weren't able to use the internet and like show it, she wanted to make sure they had the visuals they need. So it provides visuals when kids are trying to study something up close, a grid, a graph, whatever. She wanted that in there. Okay, it provides rigorous examples. And this is going to come up in my do's. Is that it is grade level rigor work. Right? When we make up our own problems, we do not make them as rigorous as the standard generally expects. And that's a downfall. That's why we're not curriculum writers, right? So the level to which students need to be able to do the math is the level and the rigor of what you're going to find in the workbook. Now, can we always go above that rigor and go even higher? Of course we can. But that is what's there is the expectation. And so we're not trying to dumb that down at all. The purpose of the workbook is it provides an opportunity for independent practice. That's going to be a part of our dues. Just hang in there with me for a minute and I'll tell you more about that. Okay, the purpose of the whiteboard, we did a whole session on this Facebook Live last week, so go catch that. If you want that replay, just put replay whiteboard in the chat. We'll make sure you get the link to that. But the whiteboard is meant to build the learning. Okay, it's meant to make learning easy to see and to discuss. It includes rough draft thinking and it provides scaffolds. So we went over that last week, all the different things that are on the board and how it scaffolds learning for kids. So that's why we use the whiteboard to build the learning. And then I say the workbook is more to anchor the learning. Okay, so here's some things to know. Number one, workbook is not the teacher's guide. This is really important. Oftentimes I'll go into classrooms and teachers are actually teaching from the workbook. Like they never use the teacher's guide. They just open up the workbook. Yesterday we were on page 17. Today we're on page 18. Let's get started. And they teach from the workbook. That was not the intention. The teacher's guide is the guide. That's how we teach our lessons. The workbook is used to supplement and as a companion to the teacher's guide. The workbook is not to be 100% completed. Okay, it was never, as completion does not equal mastery. Just because you do all the problems doesn't mean they get it, doesn't mean they're proficient, and definitely doesn't mean they're mastered. But I think for a lot of us, that's even how we grew up, is we completed all the problems on every page. I also think that we are oftentimes influenced by parents. We'll say things like, yeah, but my parents freak out if there's anything undone. Well, I'm like, well, then stop sending it home. Like, I just wouldn't send those pages home because then there's not a conversation because mom and dad don't see it, right? Or I tell them at like back to school night, the goal is not to finish all the problems. So when you get a workbook page that comes home and it's only partially finished, it's because we only needed some of those problems to practice independently. We did others of those problems on a whiteboard, right? Mom and dad, no, your kid was not slacking off. They're not lazy. They don't need to do more problems at home. It's okay if it's unfinished, but you have to communicate that, because completing all the workbook pages just so parents aren't mad is ridiculous, right? It's just a poor use of the workbook. The lesson goal, okay? So the workbook is not the goal of the lesson. It's just not. So we're going to talk more about what it is and the do's in just a minute. Okay, the workbook is helpful in building procedural fluency. Remember, procedural fluency is the ability to do a problem with ease without thinking, what's the next step? I forgot, right? Like I just know I'm going to do the ones first, then the tens first, then that's building procedural fluency. And the only way we get procedurally fluent is by practice. So it is important. So I know some of us are like anti-workbook, like we've gone for almost the extreme other direction. I am not an extremist. I think the workbook has a place. I just don't think that it is the tool, right? It is there to build procedural fluency. It really is not there to build understanding. It can be used as that in some lessons, right? It's not always either or, but generally. The workbook is appropriate. We talked about that on that last slide. It's rigorous. It is age appropriate, developmentally appropriate, standards appropriate. Unless your standards are different than that of math expressions, it is appropriate. So we may philosophically disagree with that. We may think these problems are so hard, my first graders would never be able to do them. Well, that's just an opinion. Okay, because they are appropriate according to the standard and the rigor of the learning progression. We may not like it, but it doesn't change the fact that it's still appropriate. So our goal is to elevate our teaching and provide whatever scaffolds are needed so kids can access that level of problem. And then, of course, it is a resource to help meet the learning goal. Okay, so I want you to put something in the chat right now. I want you to put anything you just heard that you're like, okay, yes, I need to remember that. Just like say it for someone else. What did you just hear? You're like, I'm going to go put it in the chat. Make sure everyone else heard it too. Something that is resonating with you, put that in the chat. Okay. Don't. So here's what we're not going to do. Okay. That's the purpose. That was all for, that's just a snippet of what we have in that mini course. So if you are a VIP summit attender, so if you went to the virtual summit, you bought the VIP access pass, don't forget you have that entire mini course. Go get it. And I'm going to tell you more about it. Okay. Don't use it 100%. Okay. So do we want to use the workbook? The answer is yes. In fact, I'm looking at this right now. This did not get changed. Sorry, friends. I'm going to have to go off the list, different list. That bullet list was not the right thing. So let's talk about do's and then I'll bring my don't. Okay. So do use it. Okay, so what I mean is it is still as a tool. I just don't want you to be the main tool. Okay. So I don't want you to like chuck it out the window. I want you to use it to maintain the rigor of the lesson. I do want you to do the problems yourself and then prioritize what needs to be taught during the lesson. So what that means is there are more problems than you have time for. You cannot do all of the problems, right? So that is under the don't list. Don't do all the problems. You just can't. Okay, so I'm going to do all the problems myself. I'm going to work through all the problems because that gives me a sense of like the breadth of the concept. And if I just start at number one and I work my way down, right, then I'm only going to get to part of the rigor versus I did number 1 and 2. And then all of a sudden I got to number 10. I was like, oh, whoa, that's like double zeros. Like that one's going to throw them. Or number 6 is like that wording is really tough. Like we need to make sure we give that type of scenario to kids. When I do all the problems myself, it's so much different than just looking at the problems because I've done that too, right? I like kind of browse them, get a sense of what's happening. It really is different when you work the problems out. Okay, so when you work the problems out, you're just aware of so many things that you're going to anticipate from students, hardships, confusion, etc. Once I work them out, then I'm going to prioritize. So now I'm going to say things like, okay, I'm actually going to start with number 5 because I think that might be a good intro into this. Then I'm going to do number 1 together. Then I'm going to have them independently do number 6. And then I want to make sure we at least get 2 more examples. I'm going to try number 10 and 11, right? I'm being strategic. Will the teacher's guide do that in some ways? Yeah, it's going to say, do this problem, show kids this problem, but it doesn't, just because there's a picture of the workbook in the teacher's guide does not mean open the workbook, start from number 1. You won't see that in the script. It doesn't say that. So read the teacher's guide because again, it's only using the workbook as a resource. It's having you discuss this problem, ask kids to compare and contrast this. Like it's telling you to do so much more engaging things than just look at the workbook. But we see a picture of the workbook and we think, oh, this must be about the workbook. It just isn't. So work through all the problems. Circle the ones that you want to make sure you get through because you want to get the breadth of that lesson and you know you can't get them all done. You're going to run out of time. So you want to get to the rigor of that lesson. Okay. You'll choose some of the problems I'm going to build understanding with. I'm just going to do it on my whiteboard. I'm not going to do it in the workbook. Right? Other problems, I'm like, nope, this is an independent problem. We're going to anchor by this point. We should have it down. I'm going to have them anchor their learning in the workbook. So now they have a working example because now they know how to do it right? Versus rough draft thinking, I'm still figuring it out. I'm still not sure what to do. Like that's going to happen on my whiteboard because it keeps the thinking going. I'm only working on one problem at a time versus as soon as I open that workbook, they see 25 problems. How many of your kids shut down when they see 25 problems? I'm like, I can't even do one problem, much less 25. Like, let's cause the behavior issues now. Let's shut down now. Like other kids are like, ooh, and they like start working through all the problems, even though you've said, don't work ahead. Stay with me. We can't help it. Okay. So what I want you to think about this, and I'll come back to that list, is this is something I share oftentimes when I'm training teachers, is that I want you to think about the trauma of a workbook. And a lot of times when I come into classrooms and I'm modeling lessons, I'll walk in and as soon as people know, like I'm the one that's teaching that day, kids get out their workbooks, they get out their pencils and then like stare at me like ready to go. And I'm almost always like, well, put your workbook away. And kids are like, what do you mean? Like, put it away. Okay. Get out your whiteboard. We might get to your workbook today. And it's like deer in the headlight, like what is happening to math class? Math class is synonymous with workbook. And I'm like, but workbook is not math class, right? So I don't even take it out. It doesn't mean I'm not doing the problems from it. I'm doing the problems, but I'm just showing them one problem at a time. If you're in the Math Genius Squad, I do this on a slide for you. I already choose the problem, okay? And I show them just that one slide, or I have my problems and maybe under a document camera, or I have them on the whiteboard. They only get to see one problem at a time. And that way they're invested in one problem. When they have no idea how many problems that I'm going to work on today, they don't have a problem investing, meaning they'll do more math talk. They'll do more trial and error. They'll try multiple methods. They're going to do so much more engagement because it's one problem. But when they open the workbook and they see that there's 15 problems there, they're like, lady, stop making me talk about this. We got 14 more problems. They know they have more work to do. Why would they want to invest in one problem that deeply? They don't. Okay, so we're in this lesson, we're choosing some of the problems. I've already worked them out myself. And now I know which order I'm doing them in, what order we're maybe trying together, which ones are trying like in an inquiry approach, which ones we're practicing. And then when we get to a place where I'm like, okay, I get a sense that we're there. Like we have enough information that I want to see how are we really doing. Okay, then I might say, everyone, open up your workbook, go to number 4. Ready? Show me what you can do. Maybe work with a partner, work with your small group. They do number 4. Okay. They might hold it up. I'm walking around trying to see like what kids know, what they don't know. I might have a backup plan. If you finish early, also try number 6, maybe so keep everyone going. Okay. And then like, awesome. Okay. Everyone close your workbooks, put them back under your desk, right? Or like fold it over, sit on it. I don't care, but get it off your desk because it's distracting. Go back to the whiteboard. Let's talk about what we just saw. Now I present the next part of the lesson, the next thing they're going to have to do, right? We do some practicing on our whiteboards. And then I'm like, okay, I think we have enough. Let's go back to the workbook and see what you can do independently. So I want you to think about that as a way to keep your students engaged, which comes to this next one, provide at least 10 minutes of independent practice a day. It doesn't have to be the last 10 minutes of your block, although I do like that as an option because it gives me time to pull at least one small group. It doesn't mean we only do 10 minutes of independent practice. It just means shoot for at least that much, right? So in activity 1, I'm like, I want to at least get 5 minutes of independent practice in, which means I don't want to be talking the whole time and I don't want to be whiteboarding the whole time unless it's a brand new skill and we have multiple days of building the lesson. In that case, we may never open that workbook today because we're still just building the idea. In 1 or 2 days, I'm like, well, there's gonna be more workbook because today is a procedural fluency day. We've already really built the concept. We just need to get good at it and go apply it. Okay, but at least 10 minutes of independent practice so that we're not just doing problems with kids all the time. That does create helplessness. And then we see it on assessments. When they don't do on assessments, it's because we held their hand too much during the lesson. Right? And then I want you to anchor the learning there or in a math notebook. So for me, the whiteboard is to build learning. The workbook is to anchor learning or apply learning, build procedural fluency. That's the point of it. So if you're someone, I know we had a question about the math notebook, the balance of the workbook versus the math notebook. Okay, so this is a philosophy thing. Okay, this is not a math expressions thing. This is a Shannon's idea thing, right? But in my mind, once we've built the learning, we've talked about it a ton, we really understand it. Now I want you to go do those problems in the workbook, whatever we need to build either procedural fluency or to have an anchored problem that we can continue to go back to when we forget, right? Like we don't remember the steps or we want to, label things or whatever. I might use the workbook for that. I might use it as a formative assessment, a check for understanding type of thing. The math notebook, if you are a math notebook person, is I don't believe in writing down vocabulary words and writing down definitions. And like, I think it's a total waste of time and it sucks up so much working memory to copy from a board. I do think you use a math notebook when you're ready to anchor learning. So at the very end of the lesson, when we're summarizing, I'm doing a close for my lesson and I'm saying, okay, so basically today, friends, we just learned X, Y, and Z about fractions. I might be creating my own anchor chart. So we called it this one is a numerator, this one is a denominator. And we found out when we add unit fractions, right, whatever it is, boys and girls, and your notebook, anchor your learning today. What do we remember about numerator and denominators? Label them. Let's color code them. In your own words, which one, what is the numerator describing? Draw a picture and make it, whatever. I have my anchor chart so they can use my general ideas, but I want them to anchor it to make sense to them. Now they have experience with the vocabulary. It means something, but doing it before I even learn it, no, I'm going to play with it. I'm going to learn like intuitively what it is. Then I'm going to name it. And then I say, just claim it. So once I name it, I'm like, oh, what you just figured out was, okay. And then I'm talking about it with numerator and denominator. At the end of the lesson, I'm like, claim it now. It's your own word. What is it? How are we going to remember? And give a picture to anchor it. That's when I use the math notebook. Okay. So there's some other ways to use it, but that's good for now. The don't list. Okay. So sorry about my slides. They got messed up. So don't teach from it. We don't teach from the workbook. We teach from the teacher's guide. We said that. Don't do every problem. We made that really clear. There's not time. And then this is a fun one. Don't skip the hard ones. Our job is not to censor the math book. Okay. It's not to be like, wow, that one's just going to be really hard for them. Yeah, that's the rigor. That is what they have to do. That is the level to which they were going to have to perform. So I might have to scaffold and do some problems out of order to get them up to that level, right? Or give them a scaffold for that problem. But I don't just take away the problem because I think it's going to be hard, or the language is tricky, or there's too much reading. That's real life. So I can't just expect them to do it on the test if I never do it during class, right? So be careful about what we're doing to help students that's really creating helplessness. My friends, put in the chat, what are you thinking now? What's something you heard, you don't want to forget? That's the purpose of the workbook. I know we had another question here. Let me just refresh this. We had another question about not having access to all the materials. So if I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly who it was that posted. So they said they didn't have a workbook yet. They had only access to online. If you have online, then you have access to the teacher's guide. So hopefully what I just went through is going to help you. You want the teacher's guide first. The workbook, you're really not using that much of. I know you said you're using the slides. If you're using Math Genius Squad slides, you're really golden. You need the teacher's guide, the Math Genius Squad slides. You will be fine until your students get their actual physical workbook. You'll just have to have them practice and apply in their notebook until they get the physical workbook. But it'll be fine as long as you have digital. If students have digital, they can also bring up the activity book and you can have them doing, looking at the computer and then working it out. It's not ideal because, again, every time I have to copy from a screen to a piece of paper, I'm using working memory, right? Not ideal for kids that are struggling. But that's what I would do if I were you. Okay, so let's see what else we have. Yeah, so Kristen says I need to get better at giving them the independent practice time. And, Kristen, I think that it's like an art that I have not mastered either. And I always run out of time. But what I find is I have a whole line of kids at my desk when it comes to something they haven't seen before, or an assessment or a quiz of all these kids that don't know. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, we've done this, we've learned. No, they did it when I held their hand. They never had to do it by themselves. And I think that's the mistake there. It doesn't have to be a long time of independent, but enough. So put in some what we call hinge questions. If you're an advocate of the formative 5, I put in almost like exit tickets every time we're about to learn something different. Like we're going from, okay, we just had to ungroup the 10s, but like now we have to do some problems where we also have to ungroup the 100s. I'll put a hinge question, like an exit ticket right there to see, like, are we ready for that or not? And if they can't do it independently with the 10s, then I don't keep going into the 100s. I do maybe a couple more problems of the 10s. Okay. So those little hinge questions help me to get more independent practice. So other things that we're seeing rigor is key. Yeah. Well, we can't be surprised when they don't do well on state testing when we have really dumbed down the problems all year long, right? Like, because we're trying to be helpful, but really we should be thinking, what scaffolds do they need to be able to access that higher level? Michelle, yeah, great takeaway, doing the problems yourself. And Michelle, I'm not sure if you're new to math expressions, but it is the best way to learn the program is to actually do the math. Like, I know it takes a lot of extra time, but working through it is so rewarding because you're already anticipating what's going to, because you start making the mistakes yourself. Because if you do it without the teacher's guide, like the answer key, right? You're like, okay, then you check the answer keys. Like, that's it. Is that what I'm supposed to do? Okay. Is that the same thing? And it just sets you up for success. I do the same thing with assessments. I always take the unit test myself before I ever teach the unit. It's just really a great way to learn it. Yeah, most of the work on the whiteboard. Great. Kristen, I'm so glad that you had that experience. The whiteboard really is where kids will take risks. They'll try multiple methods. They'll have discussions. I just think that there's some trauma around the workbook. Okay, sorry, friends. I'm trying to get to all the responses and it's just not showing them to me. So hold on. Let me see if I can get them to go there. Hold on. Wait for it. I don't know why it's doing that for me. I'm sorry. I feel like there's more comments. I can see that they're there, but my Facebook won't let me scroll to them. Let me see if I can get it one other way and answer any questions you have. So if you're watching live, put your takeaway in the chat right now. And oh, there I am. See, I can see it. Ooh, I don't want to hear myself. Hold on a minute. Okay, good. Heidi, glad you're here. Let's see. Mari, workbook does not have to be 100% completed. Yeah, especially if you're new to expressions, like we got to like really hone that in. There's just not time. And as you get up to like second grade on, there's so many problems. They're just, you'll never finish them all. Okay, so Heidi says she's updating her curriculum night file to help parents understand unfinished workbook. Yeah, I mean, we just have to tell parents, right? It's just different. Like for them, they think their kid's doing well when it's all completed. I'm like, that's just not, we did so much of that on their whiteboard. Let's see, anchoring your learning. And then, okay, good. I think we got them all now. So if I missed you, I'm sorry. I'm glad that you're here. Let's just see. Oh, hi, Jody. Glad you're here too. Okay, I think we're good now. Let me know, and Katie as well. Let me know if there's other questions. I will answer them below. I want to remind you that if you purchase that VIP pass, let me just show this to you really quickly. Sorry for that little bit of a ramble while I tried to figure out my own Facebook. So remember that you got this work. So if you went to the summit and you bought the VIP access, you have a mini course hanging out in there for you that is probably one of the better ones I've ever done, where I teach you about how to overhaul the workbook, like how to make it more engaging. And there's more than like, I think 20 activities that we put together, a whole workbook for you and ideas about how you can make the workbook more engaging, more helpful, more hands-on, whatever, where we take the workbook problems, but we do different things with them. So I just want to remind you that that is there. I know there's not everyone who's got the VIP access didn't already access that. So go get it. Okay. I mean, you have it, you paid for it. I want you to get those resources. If you did not buy the VIP access during the summit and you want a course like that, just let me know. I have not published it to be accessible for anyone else. But if we have enough interest in the comments, then I can put it up. It would, of course, there'll be a charge for it, but I can have it separately from the summit. Just let me know. But if there's gotta be enough interest for me to do that, so just put that in the comments if you're interested. And I think that's it. So any other questions, put them in the comments. I will continue to respond to those over the next couple of days. And we'll see you next week, friends. So happy Math Crush Monday, even though it's a Tuesday. I hope you had a great start to your week, and we'll see you next week. Bye for now.